This is Harry Lenga. He's 67. He is sprightly, affable, articulate. He's married, has 3 children, and lives in St. Louis. Harry is special. Harry has cheated dictators, death camps, and death. Harry has done more than survive. He has prevailed. Harry, let's go back to Poland in 1939. Tell us something about you, your family, the town that you lived in.
I was born in Kozienice, Poland. My father was a watchmaker, in fact a very known watchmaker. And I had 3 brothers, sister, my mother, my father, and a paralyzed grandmother which was bedridden for several years before the war broke out yet. When the war broke out, I happened to be in Warsaw, the capital city of Poland, and I got caught in it. And when the Germans finally marched in after 3 weeks beleaguering the city without water and food, finally this Polish government surrendered. Poland itself was taken over only in 3 days. They took over Poland. Soon they marched in. We really right away found out that actually they came to destroy us. We didn't believe yet that it was destruction, but torture us. It was going on. The most terrible thing what happened, which we didn't understand why, they told us that every man, woman, child has to wear the armband with the Jewish star and never to be without. And whoever will be found without an armband on his arm will be shot. And the first day, they shot several hundred people but forgot just to put on the armband, or they were ignorant. They didn't know what to do and how to do it. But after that, what happened, everybody was very careful that they'll have the armband before they walked out from their homes. And later we found out that this was a diabolical plan created so they'll recognize each Jew. Because every single day in the morning when people used to go to work, they were in their streetcars, buses, and tried to reach their place of work. They were grabbed, taken off of the buses, taken in trucks, and taken away, so called to be working. They kept, I was kept one time there too, they kept us 10 to 12 hours. And the only thing what they did with us is torturing us, beating us, doing things which is undescribable.
Harry, how many Jews were there in that town?
And in Warsaw at that time was 500,000 Jews. And the war broke out. But of course later they brought in another 100,000 from the surrounding areas when they built the ghetto, when they built the wall. And they made the ghetto.
I want you to back up a minute. Kozienice was known for something. Your town was known for something. What was it?
Yeah, Kozienice was a famous city because there was born in the 17th century a very pious Jew and a great rabbi. They called him the Kozienice Maggid. And that was right shortly after the Baal Shem Tov created Hasidism. And of course, after that, his children and grandchildren, they followed, they became rabbis, and they had apostles which they believed in him all over the Poland, and especially for holidays like the New Year's or the Day of Atonement, they used to come from all over the cities to the rabbi, to visit the rabbi and try to get a blessing from him. And they had museums even, especially in our town, where the Maggid used to live. He used to have his bed, his chair, his house was kept up. And people used to come from all over the world to see it.
Very special place.
It was a tourist attraction.
What was your religious background? What was the
Well, my
training?
father was Hasidic, he was a Hasid, and we were raised real strictly Orthodox. I used to go to yeshiva, and my old brothers, they went to yeshivas. And we had a Jewish education, but also my father was a little also enlightened person too, because he understood that we need the secular education too. And he sent us to public school, which a lot of other families didn't do those things
No,
in
that's
those
true.
years. So I attended public school too.
You started to tell us what happened when the Germans invaded Poland and what the first things that occurred, rounding them up, making them wear stars. So we want to talk a little bit about how they started to separate the Jews out. After you've worn the stars, were you allowed to work, to do whatever? How old were you at the time?
I was 19 years old.
Were you working?
Yeah, I was working in Warsaw as a watchmaker. My father especially sent me there that I polish up my watchmaking skill. And that's how it happened. I got caught in Warsaw when the Germans marched into Warsaw.
How far was Warsaw from your town?
It was about 45 miles.
So you were living there, or did you go back and forth?
Oh, no, I was living there in Warsaw.
And you got caught?
Right.
Tell us how.
And right then, it starts, every day got worse. They issued the ration cards, which was not sufficient to live on, but they didn't allow to have any schools. They didn't allow even to have a hospital. But somehow we managed in secret to have hospitals to help each other how much possible it was. They even had schools. Children used to come every single day in basements.
This is in the ghetto now? This is the Warsaw Ghetto that we're talking about.
Right. And of course, the Germans, the Nazis, they were surrounding the ghetto from the outside, and they had the Jewish police inside patrolling, and the Polish police was outside the wall. And inflation got to that point that a loaf of bread was so expensive, $25, which before the war was 50 cents. And a lot of people, mostly the poor people, start to starve from hunger. They just were laying on the streets and begging for something to eat, and they just died.
How many people were in the Warsaw Ghetto when you were there? Do you know? Do you have any idea?
Well, the estimate was it was about over 600,000.
And people were being shipped out of there, or was this before they did that?
That was before. And of course, it was going on constantly. But the poor people, they starved right in the beginning. The people that had something to sell, to get rid of, for money, for something, they still existed a little longer. But it got worse all the time. And then, when they decided to start instead to grab the people who used to send them away for a day's work or a week's work or a labor camp, they took them away, and we never heard of them. We didn't know what's going on.
You were working while you were in the ghetto?
I still was working. My boss, they took away his business where he was before. The Germans went in and just told him to work hard. But somehow he managed still to save some merchandise, and he opened a little store in the ghetto. And I was with him, I helped him still there too in the ghetto.
What did you sell?
Well, we sold
and
mostly...
who bought it? Those who had money?
Mostly watch parts. Mostly was watch parts in the ghetto. We tried, we didn't have any new watches to bring in, so we tried always to fix up the old watches, and a lot of watchmakers used to come in and buy the parts, and we used to have a lot of parts. We used to have a wholesale business in watch parts.
Did the Germans?
The Germans
your
came in,
services?
they even came to the ghetto because we were the only one that time left which had the watch parts, and they found out, and they used to come in the ghetto to buy parts from us. Some of them they paid even money, they were nice enough to pay. Some of them they just came in with their order list, and they told them this we need. And we gave it to them, and they just walked out without even say thank you.
Now, was your whole family in the Warsaw Ghetto?
No, just myself. My whole family was living in Kozienice. My father still had the store, and he worked for the German Wehrmacht as a watchmaker. They brought in all the watches from the soldiers, and my father used to fix them for them.
Watchmaking in time of war is a critical service.
It's critical, and yet it's a very important, because everybody needs to have a watch. And we were, any other trades, they were completely without work. But we were very busy, even home, we were very busy just serving the soldiers, the Wehrmacht.
What were your feelings then? What did you think was going to happen? Do you have any idea?
Well, we knew that it's not good, but somehow we'll manage to survive, because we figured, we looked back in our history, and we thought it'll be an episode like we had before, and somehow some of us will survive.
So even though you were cut off from your family, and you obviously had no communication, you had a certainty or assurance.
Well, we had communication only through the mail. I used to write letters, send us on through the mail, in the beginning, not later. When they start to take off people off the streets and taking them away for resettlement, what they called, then they stopped the mail too. But I got out from Warsaw Ghetto
How did you get out of the ghetto?
Well, I got out in the ghetto. My father, like I told you, he was working for the Germans, and he knew the German commandant. And he told him that he needs some spare parts for watches, to fix their watches. And he said, I want to send my son to Warsaw to buy parts. Now, he could not tell him that I'm in the ghetto, because nobody could get out of the ghetto. But I needed a pass to be able to get on the train and be able to buy a ticket to go home. Otherwise, you could not get a ticket if you didn't have a certificate, a permit from the German government that they allow you to travel. So he obtained that, and he sent it to me by mail, of course, and that gave me a way how to try to get out of the ghetto. And I smuggled out from the ghetto by bribing the Jewish police and the Polish police. In the middle of the night, I jumped the wall.
Jewish police. Judenrat? Is that part of the Judenrat? What was the Judenrat?
They were employed by the Judenrat. The Judenrat were mostly people that were willing to collaborate with the Germans, mostly, except a few which they were forced to be there. Chernyakov, the president of the council, he was a good friend of Frank, General Frank, what was the governor of the Polish part, which was not included in the Reich. The general government, they used to call it. And that's why he appointed him, he should become the president of the Judenrat in Warsaw.
You call the Judenrat collaborators.
Well, they were collaborators because they, I would say, they couldn't help themselves.
What were they meant to do? What was it they were supposed to do?
The main thing was, every single day, they came into them and they said, you have to deliver to me 10,000 people. And they sent out those police, the Jewish police, on the streets with the Germans' help. The Nazis were there, the SS, and they grabbed people. In the beginning, they used to grab only young people, only men from the ages from 16 to 40. But later they picked up children, they picked up women, and they grabbed them, put them in the trucks and took them to the railroad stations.
You said they could not help themselves. They were appointed to do this.
That's right.
In order to keep some kind of order in the ghetto, and also to be responsible to the Germans.
In fact, when Chernyakov, the president, when he found out, somehow he found out where the transports are going, that they are sent to Treblinka, and there they are exterminated in the gas chamber, then he committed suicide.
Harry, what do these names signify to you? And I hope I pronounced them properly. I'm going to run them off. Gorchitsky, Wolanov, Starachowice, Treblinka, Auschwitz, Mauthausen, Milk, Ebensee.
Well, the first few what you mentioned, they were slave labor camps like Gorchitsky, in Wolanov, in Starachowice. Those were slave labor camps.
What did you do in a slave labor camp?
Slave
you
labor
were there.
camp.
You were there.
I was in all of them, and all of those what I mentioned to you. They let us work hard without very minimum food, no clothing, and every single Sunday, once a week, they used to make selections. They used to take out people that were already weak, their clothing were torn, or they were not even shaved. They just picked them up, and they accumulated about 200, 250, 300. They lined them up at the fence, and they machine gunned them, they killed them out. And that was going on every single Sunday. And they used to bring in always new prisoners into the camp. Now in those camps they only kept the Jews. There was no other nationalities. Now in the concentration camps then, like in Starachowice, they took me to Auschwitz. In Auschwitz you already had all kinds of nationalities. And of course the Jews were the biggest percentage from the inmates.
Back up a minute. Were you in these slave labor camps alone?
Was I?
Were you in the slave labor camps alone? You survived with your brothers. Were your brothers with you at this time?
My two brothers were, all three we were together. We ran out before my town was resettled, so-called resettled. When they took out all the Jews, we had a tiffin, a Polish policeman. He was the captain of the police. And he came in to my father and he told him, I'm going to tell you something, but please don't you ever repeat this to anybody, because if they found out that I told you about it, I'll be dead. And he told them that 2 days from now, they're going to surround the city and take out all the Jews and take them away. And that's all he said, I can tell you, I won't tell you anymore. And I know you have 3 young sons. Please see to it that let them run away before that happened. And we did.
You did run away?
We did.
Tell us about that.
After that, my father told us, you young, you have the right to try to live. And please get out. We used to have about 4 miles in our town, a camp, which my youngest brother, which lives with me here in St. Louis, he used to work there too.
What kind of a camp?
It was irrigation, you know, water irrigation,
okay.
And they used to work there. Every time they used to have a certain group be sent out there in the town. That was before the ghetto was even made. So when came the time when the Judenrat in Kozienice had to take people every single day. They used to grab them out from the homes. And my youngest brother was caught one time, and he worked there, and they kept him there to work longer. They didn't send him home anymore. And later they made him for a little foreman. He should be leading the workers. So he got known there. And they knew about him, and they knew who he is also because of my father's jewelry store. So they gave him a special treatment. So his idea was then that we should run away and get into that camp and somehow he'll make that foreman to register us in the books, so in case the Germans come look, if any Jews are hiding there, will be registered. And sure enough, we ran away about 4 hours before the city was surrounded, 8 o'clock in the evening. It was dark, we crossed the river, and we ran all 3 of us away. And he woke up the foreman, and he told him, I brought my 2 brothers, please help me and register them in the book. And he did. He put our names like we are working there steady for a long time before. And that's how we got saved. We were not taken away. My grandmother, they shut in the bed. Children which couldn't, sick people couldn't get out from their beds, they were shut right in their beds. They took all the people out. They told them to take only what they can carry with them.
How did you know that, Harry? How did you know your grandmother was shot in the bed?
2 men that were taken away with the whole population, Jewish population from the ghetto, from Kozienice. They escaped. And if you have time, I can tell you how that happened.
Go ahead.
They escaped when the transport came up onto Treblinka. They packed all the people in Kozienice in trains, in boxcars, cattle cars, between 100 to 121 cars. The people were so packed they couldn't even raise their arms. And when they finally arrived at Treblinka, they told them to get out. They terrorized them. They were shooting into the people. And they told them all to get out and line up. And when they lined up, they took out 100 men, 100 young men, and took them in a side. And the rest of them, they told them to undress, completely naked. They undressed completely naked. They told them of a loudspeaker that they are going to be taken in a shower. They're going to be given new clothing. They have a special camp. They'll be able to live in that camp. But the only thing, they have to be prepared to work hard. If they'll work hard, they'll help the German Reich to win the war, then they'll be saved and they'll survive the war. And of course, they gave me my piece of soap, each one. And then they pushed them in that big gas chamber, and those 100 men were watching all things what's going on. And all of them, the whole transport fit in. It was over 10,000 people, children and women and men, all together from our town, Kozienice. And they pushed them in at the gas chamber, and then they saw that some soldiers went up, assessment went up on the roof and manipulated there. And after several minutes, they start to hear terribly yelling and squeaking and crying, desperately trying, just communicate with just terrible noises. And that was going on for about between 8 and 10 minutes. And suddenly everything quiet down that you couldn't hear not a thing. Then they opened all those doors and bulldozers drove in and picked up bodies and threw them in special kind of ditches which were digged a day before. When they emptied out the gas chamber with those bodies, they poured gasoline on those bodies and set them aflame. And those 100 men, they took back to the places where all that clothing was laying, but everyone took off and let it laying right behind them. They were not there anymore, and they told them to take that clothing and threw it back in those empty cars. And they had an idea. They asked their neighbor, they say, we wanted to try to jump in those wagons. Who's coming with us? And they were afraid. And they said, please, do us a favor. We are going to try. Soon we'll jump in there, cover us up with clothing, how much possible it is. We'll watch if the guard doesn't see that second and will give a jump in. And they did, and they were successful. And they were covered up, and the train moved out from Treblinka towards Germany, back. And they were waiting for several hours, and then they dig themselves out from behind the clothing, and they got to a little windows in those wagons, and they managed to free themselves and jump out. And they walked nights only till they reached our camp in Wolanów. We were already at that time in Wolanów, and they told us the story what they saw with their own eyes. And one man, from those, one boy, he went with me to school. I knew him very well. And he told me, I knew whatever he said, that's true. That's exactly what it was. Then I realized I'll never see my loved ones anymore.
You and your brother, right? You and your brother.
And not only my family, I lost 67 relatives, people that were living in that town alone. I'm not talking about other cities.
You say that's how you were saved when you and your brothers went to this camp. Saved?
Saved for the time being.
Is in quote marks.
For the time being. We didn't know, we knew it's just a day. A day meant we have another day shorter to the war will end. We knew somehow, somewhere, the war has to come to an end. The question was only, will we be living that time when that will happen? And if you got through one day, you knew it's one day less.
How were you treated?
Very brutally. In the slave labor camps, the Poles used to be the capos, the...
Say what a capo is, yes, because a lot of people won't know that.
They used to be the ones that were driving you to work hard, to do faster, to do things which is impossible.
Were they Jews?
They
were they
didn't
Czechs?
like.
Were they Jews? Were they Czechs? Were they Ukrainians? Who were the
No,
capos?
in the beginning they only used to have Poles. In the slave labor camps they used to have Poles, and they used to have Ukrainians, which they used to be the guards around the camp. They used them as security guards. But inside there were the Poles, used to be the foremans and the, you know, so we
Yes.
didn't call them capos yet then. But they were the ones, the how do you say, the Aufsehers, they used to call them in German, which they watched
They saw
the
to
people.
it that you worked.
Right. They watched the people that they should work. They should do their work.
Were they kind?
Well, some of them were kind, but most of them they were not. Most of them were not. I would say about 80% of them were mean. They did to us things that they didn't have to do it.
Were you and your brothers beaten?
Many times. We were beaten if you did work hard, or if you didn't, you were beaten.
For no reason at all?
For no reason whatsoever.
How did you manage to stay together, the three of you?
Well, the only thing what happened one time, I'll tell you, that's very important. Pardon me.
Yes.
They made, like I told you, remember, they made in those slave labor camp selections in every Sunday, and sooner or later we knew we'll fall in a selection and we'll be finished. Because one time I remember, that, and that's the most important, that Sunday when that happened, I went out to work, and I used to work for a company which, they were Germans, but they used to build barracks. And I used to mix the cement, so they'll have the cement to put the foundation before they put up the barrack. And there was a German watching us at work, and he used to beat terribly everyone, no matter how. He was very mean. And suddenly came to me one time an idea, and I walked up to him and I asked him if I can do him a favor. And he looked at me, he thought I got crazy, I lost my mind. And he said, what kind of favor can you do for me? I says, I'm a watchmaker and I like to fix a watch. It would be an honor for me to fix a watch for you. And soon I told him that, I saw his look in his eyes changed completely. He says, you mean it? You're not telling me stories? I said, no, I'm not. I am a watchmaker. He said, I got a broken watch home and I'll bring it to you tomorrow. Report to me in the morning when you come right away. And I did. And he took me in his office. He showed me the watch, and I told him I'll fix it. He said, take all your time you want it. I don't care how long it takes.
What'd you use for tools?
We had tools. I still had, in the labor camp, they did not take anything away from us yet. And we had all the tools. In fact, my father gave us all the tools, even his tools he gave us away. Even he didn't believe the last minute what it's going to happen. But he still, deep in his mind, he knew, because he gave us away his own tools, and we didn't want it. He says, Dad, why don't you leave tools for yourself too? You'll need them too. He said, I don't think so. You are more important. So we had the tools. We had even parts and everything. Yeah, I could put in a crystal. I had crystals. I have materials too. Everything he gave us. So I was sitting and fixing the watch. And I fixed him the watch. It took about 2 weeks, and I fixed him the watch. And he started to bring me other watches. And he became a very famous guy by his soldiers, friends, the Germans, that he has somebody that fixes watches. He used to bring watches from them and bring us into us. And the commandant from the camp, the one, he was a the worst guy. He killed people just for the smallest thing. He didn't like your look, the way you look at him. He killed himself. He took out his pistol and shot you to death. And one Sunday, that Sunday was my oldest brother. He passed away. He lived in France, in Paris. His coat was torn. And I know for sure when they'll see that that sleeve was completely torn off, they'll take him out for the selection. So I took off. I didn't know what to do. It was not time enough to sew it together. I just took off his coat and I turned it inside out. I looked at the lining and I saw the lining is still good. So I turned it inside out and I said, put it over like that. At least it doesn't look torn. And we walked out. And when we lined up and they start to look, suddenly the commandant, that guy from the lager, from our camp, says, the watchmaker what works for Hege Haney should come out, step out. And I said, oh, that's it. And I said to my brothers, please, don't come with me. We had decided before, whenever happens to one, we'll all do the same thing, even if it means death. In that moment, when I heard my name, I was sure he's going to finish me off. So I says, you don't have to step out now. Let's stay behind. Please, don't come with me. And I walked out. And I come up, I says to me, are you working for again? Are you a watchmaker? I say, yes. He said, from now on, you're not going to work for them. You're going to work for me. You're not going to go to work anymore. From now on, you'll have a separate barrack, and I'll let you be there, and I'll bring you every single day all the watches you can fix. And when I heard that, I says, you're telling me you'll give me so much work. I have 2 brothers, they are watchmakers too. Will it be all right, they can help me? He says, call them out. And he called them out and took us out and sent us back right away to the barracks.
Did they know how to repair watches?
Yeah, they were watchmakers.
Okay, so they were
all 3 were watchmakers. Okay. All 3 were watchmakers.
You didn't have to protect
Not
them.
only that, I can tell you a story, but I saved my brother from certain death. Suddenly he got in the camp Typhus. You know,
which camp?
In that camp, Wolanov, in slave labor. And there we had a doctor, and the doctor was doing, the only thing what he was doing, in the morning, he used to come in the barracks, and if he saw somebody didn't report to the roll call, and he was laying on the bed, he asked him, what's the matter with you? And he touched his head, and he saw the fever so great, big. He just put his name. In the afternoon, they came, they took him out, and they shot him. That was the cure for typhus. And my brother suddenly got the typhus too. His temperature was almost 105. He didn't know anymore what he's talking. And I knew if I let him in the morning lay on that bunk bed, I'll come home, he'll be gone. So I took him down, I dressed him, and I set him down by a table, and I told him, please, you don't do nothing, just keep your head down. And even if somebody talks to you, don't raise your head, because as soon as you raise your head, they'll see your eyes, they'll know you're sick. And sure enough, the commandant used to come in every morning and check all the barracks. And he comes in my barrack too, and he was sitting like that. And he says, he's working real intensively now. I say, yeah, he's straightening out a hairspring. And I said, oh, if he walks only close to him. And he said, oh, that's good. And he walked out. If he would have seen him, he would have killed him. So when he walked out, he drove out from the camp. I took him back in and put him back in on the bunk bed and put ice to his head. I saved his life with God's help.
So many people spoke of the death of God in the camps, and yet what happened to you and your brothers, the creativity with which you saved or gave of yourself to save them, seems to promote a belief in God, to know that there is a divine being rather than to have God die.
Minutes like that, I always think, right after that, when he left and I saw my brother still alive, I said, oh God, thank you for that.
It's a miracle.
If we had times we believed and we didn't believe, you know, it was times like that. And I can tell you many, many miracles happened. We were close to die, and somehow we got saved.
You went from the slave camp to Auschwitz.
Right.
How did you get there, and how, were you selected out to go to Auschwitz?
It happened exactly, the Russian front came closer to that place, to our town, almost they were about, let's say, 50 miles away from there.
What year are we talking about?
That was in 1944 already.
Auschwitz?
No, not yet. That was in 1944, we were still in Starachowice. And the Russians came close. So they took us out from that camp. And they took us in trains to Auschwitz. And we arrived in Auschwitz in June, in 44. When I arrived there, 80% they took right away out in a selection. They took him right away to the gas chambers in our transport. The rest of us, they put us in Birkenau, and we stayed there, and for 3 days they just came every single day, lined us up and looked at our faces, and still picked up another few and another few constantly like that. And I remember Mengele was there between them too.
Doctor.
And finally, after those 3 days, they finally started to send us out of work, to work. Now, it's just to describe to you what Auschwitz was. They woke us up at 3 o'clock here, the alarm went down, the appeal, the roll call started at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark, especially in the winter time. We only had a pair of pants, a jacket, and a light coat. That was it. When it was, no matter how cold it was, you could not have anything. We used to take some paper from these cement bags and put underneath on our body just to keep us warm. And many times they used to fill us. When we came back, and if they found for somebody paper on their bags, they gave them 25 lashes. And yet we took a chance to do that because just to be able to stand that cold weather while we were walking outside. The fire was reaching out from the chimneys. They had 5 crematoriums there, constant, day and night. Those crematoriums were burning and the flames were coming out from those chimneys. Human flesh was constantly, the smell was constantly in the air. And we looked up. The only thing we said, when will we be free? The freedom meant, when will we get out through the chimney in the smoke? And they kept us there from 3 o'clock in the morning till about, the winter time, till about 8 o'clock when it was real light already. And they counted us 10,000 times. And while they were counting us, they beat us over the head with whips. And finally, they sent us out. To go out to work was already a relief, if they let you out to work. And they took us to different places to work. And by that, then they had coppers. They were standing over you again, and they beat at you. We used to carry home dead bodies or have dead bodies from just being beaten up. No matter how you did was not good enough. It was just a pretext just to be able to. They had a certain amount of people to beat up, and that's what they did. When they killed a man, they had an extra ration of bread, those couples. And mostly those couples were Germans, Reichsdeutsche, which they were born, criminals which they were put in a concentration camp there too. It was bad to be in any concentration camp, but especially as a Jew was divorced from everybody, even the inmates, if they were Frenchmen or Germans or against the Jew, everybody was against the Jew. And they could tell who you are because the Jew had that little yellow star on it all the time, on the lapel, on our coats.
Harry, I want to ask you a question about post-liberation. Not much is talked about or written about the difficulties of the displaced people once you had been liberated from the camps. Could you tell us briefly a little something about Ebensee and what happened to you from Ebensee?
Well, we were liberated on May the 4th, 1945. That was the worst camp of all of them, even worse than Auschwitz and even worse than Mauthausen. Now, Mauthausen was worse than Auschwitz, but Ebensee was even worse than Mauthausen. They gave us 1/2 quart of potato peeling soup, and you couldn't find a piece of peeling, just the stinking body. My brother, my older brother, the first day when we arrived there, and he took a spoon, he started to warm it. And a guy next to him, but he was already there, he said, I got news for you tomorrow. You'll be glad that you have a little more. You'll lick out the bowl with your tongue. And surely enough, it happened. Next day, he didn't warm it anymore.
This was a death camp?
That was the Ebensee.
Ebensee was also a death camp?
A death camp. They didn't put you in the crematoriums anymore. But you died just from exhaustion, from weakness, from hunger. You could, and they used to take us to work, which you used to dig with sledgehammers in the mountains to make corridors for factories, for the aircrafts. They built factories inside the mountains.
Who liberated Ebensee?
The Americans liberated us. And when they marched in, we didn't believe that it'll happen. But finally, we heard, while we were in the barracks, we heard voices say, the Americans are here, we are free. And we walked out, and sure enough, the American tanks were rolling into the camp. And a funny thing happened, I can tell you, I have to tell you that. All the nationalities, somehow, I don't know, the French, the Poles, the Hungarians, every one of them produced a little flag and waved over their heads, and they start to, every nationality start to sing their national anthem.
Their anthem.
And when all of them finished, we Jews, you know, with our very quiet voices, because we couldn't, I was 75 pounds, you can imagine. My brother Morris, he was 70 pounds. And we started to sing the Hatikva. Now listen to that story. And soon we started to sing the Hatikva, all of them, they start to make fun, the inmates. And they make noises, and that captain got out from the tank, and he took his pistol, and he shot in the air. And he said, I want everybody to be quiet. Don't you hear that somebody is singing their national anthem too? And I'm telling you, it was so silent that you could hear a fly through. And we sang the Hatikva all the way to the end. And I think that's the first time the Hatikva was sung internationally, you know, under such circumstances.
Where did you go from Ebensee? How long did it... We're talking about 1945.
That was 1945.
You never got to the United States until 1949.
Right. Well, it's a big, big thing. In the beginning, they told us that we have to go back to our places originally where we were born. And of course, we didn't want to. We didn't want to go back to Poland because we knew we don't have anything to go back to. Not only that, I have to mention that to you. I don't know if you heard about that. people that went back to Poland, Jews that went back to Poland right after the liberation, they were murdered in the middle of the night. They attacked them. The Poles got in their homes, and they attacked them with knives. They killed them. Just because they were afraid, they came back to claim their properties, or what they left there, their homes, their buildings, their stores. So we decided, most of us decided we don't want to go back to Poland.
You also didn't have much choice, though, did you?
Well,
you were really kept into
we
camps.
said, but the United Nations, they took note of it. And finally they made they decided they cannot force to go back if we don't, against our will. So we stayed in Germany, and I had an opportunity to meet some brigade, the Jewish brigade in Palestine. They were in Italy, and they heard about the concentration camps in Germany. So they came over to Germany, and they started to register whoever wants to go illegally to Palestine. And it's a story about that too. And we met him, and we registered to go illegally to Palestine. And they took us on trucks and later on trains. Trains used to come from Russia with prisoners of war, Italian prisoners of war. So in Austria, they pushed us in those wagons together with the Italians, and we came into Italy. But the British, they found out. And they found out, the brigade found out about maybe 10 minutes before that the British found out, and they're going to stop the train. So they came and they took us out on trucks and took us away to our DP camp in Modena in Italy. And when the British came, the train was empty.
Harry, why do you tell your story over and over and over?
Well, the only reason that I tell that because I made a promise to God while I was in the concentration camps that please let somebody survive, live. We didn't believe that we will survive till the last minute. We have to tell the world what really happened. We were sure that nobody knows what's going on there. Now I found out different. The world knew about it, but they didn't want to do anything about it. But that time when I was in the camps, I didn't believe that anybody knows. And I begged and prayed to God that somebody should survive so we can tell the story. And that's the most reason I like to talk. And I spend a lot of time, and I'm glad that people want to listen to me, and I can tell the stories.
For those that say that the Holocaust never happened
again,
that it was a lie.
Right. That's why we're still alive. The blood didn't stop yet boiling. What will happen when we won't be here anymore? What will they say then? And that's why I want to tell. And they'll hear things like telling for me, for other survivors that's still alive and talking about it. It'll be a little too hard to deny that the Holocaust didn't happen. And maybe the world will be able to try to prevent it, something like that should never happen again.
Thank you, Harry.